Well, thank you to NASIG once again for having me here. My name is Joe Catapano, and I am the Senior Manager for Stakeholder Engagement, focused on the North America region at ICANN. I don't think we've actually said what ICANN means yet. So ICANN stands for the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. And the first half of my deck here will focus on those last two letters, N and N. I'm based here in Washington, D.C. Yes, ICANN does have offices, and we have one here. It's what we call an engagement center, so it's a slightly smaller office. But there are a lot of ICANN organization functions that reside in that office: stakeholder engagement, communications, policy, just to name a few. So I want to thank Derek and American University. This is very special for me. I am a proud AU Eagle, graduate of the School of Public Affairs. Thank you. So being able to come back here and speak at AU is certainly something special. When I came out of graduate school at AU, I had a graduate degree in political science. My undergraduate work, which I did back in Connecticut, was in communications. And I was searching for something that blended those two fields. And it took a little bit of time, but eventually I found ICANN, and that was it. That was the perfect blend of those two things. So if you're younger, you're just starting out your career, or you're still in school, you're trying to find out, where do I fit in this space? I'm interested in a certain aspect of tech law or tech policy, but I'm not quite sure. Please feel free to find me during coffee or lunch over the next 2 days. I'd be happy to talk to you. I will do my best, as we all will throughout the next 2 days, to spell out the acronyms. Sometimes we forget, and if we do, call us out on it and have us spell it out. And so with that, I think we can go right into it here. So, what is this? This is a URL, right? ICANN.org, that is the URL for the ICANN homepage. Next slide. Now, ICANN.org is the name. And then right above that on this slide is the number. And that number is called an Internet Protocol, or IP address. And so the Internet Protocol is a set of rules that allows your computer, smartphone, or other device to find the correct location that you typed in. It identifies devices primarily by using a long string of numbers. Every computer and smart device has an IP address. Also, every website has an IP address behind the name. The numbers are not easy to memorize. So in the early days of the internet, a list was set up to map the words or the names to the IP address, because it's easier for us as humans to understand and remember names than it is numbers. Next slide. So, believe it or not, in the early days, when there were only a few hundred internet users, the names and numbers were kept on a actual physical paper list. It's hard to believe. When I first came to ICANN and someone told me that, I was like, what? However, that was the way it was. And this wonderful caricature here is of a gentleman named John Postel. He was a researcher at the University of Southern California, and he single-handedly kept track of the names and the numbers in a handwritten database, if you will. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as hosts, and the host is any device that has an IP address and is connected and reachable over the internet. Next slide. So today, of course, the internet has billions of users. There's no way that a handwritten list maintained by one individual could exist. I suppose it could, but it would be incredibly unwieldy and you need a lot of physical space for it. So because of this, the manually maintained address book was replaced by an automated and distributed address book system, commonly referred to as the domain name system, or DNS. And at its most basic level, ICANN coordinates the top level of the domain name system. Again, the most basic level. There are many nuances to that statement, and those are things that you'll learn about over the course of the next 2 days. And if you're joining us at the ICANN meeting downtown over the next week, you'll learn a lot more about that as well. Next slide. You can advance me, please. Thanks. So when you want to visit the ICANN website, you'll type icann.org into your browser. It's going up there. And your computer or device will send this information through the internet to find icann.org. Then your device will receive this information and then eventually take you to the ICANN website. And you can move to the next slide. I know, I apologize, we've got the hybrid environment means sometimes we have things that obstruct top and bottom, but there we go, awesome. So that's the simplest explanation. So to take the understanding of this a bit further, let's talk about how domain names end. So the ICANN website ends in .org. And there are many popular websites that end in .com, right, which would be another one which has obviously a large number of registrations. And then there are more that are, and maybe there may be a couple of advancements there. There you go. There are also some that have 2 letters, and those are what we call country code top-level domains. The answer is yes, Pablo, that should have been .pr, and I will make, I'll make sure to make that edit next time. However, for the purposes of this slide, .au is the website for the Australian government, and that is what they use. So there are, in North America, obviously, we have .pr, .vi as well, and then, of course, .us and .ca. Next slide. Wonderful. So here is that kind of breakdown, right? So you'll hear the acronyms GTLD, which is generic top-level domain, and there are examples of that. Probably the 3 most well-known examples of a GTLD are up there. And then, as I said, CCTLDs, and there's a few more examples here. So these are called top-level domains. And they are everything right to the right of kind of the furthest dot, or sometimes people shorten and just say to the right of the dot, but when you get kind of longer addresses, there'll be many dots. Everything to the extreme right. Go to the next slide, please. So domain name registries are organizations that manage top-level domains. They work with registrars to sell domain names to the public. If you think back to Mr. Postel's, Dr. Postel's paper list, registries work with registrars to keep an electronic version for everyone who registers a domain name within the top level. So to kind of put it another way, the company that controls .com keeps a list of everyone with a .com domain name. The organization controlling .au, in the example I used, keeps a list of everyone with a .au domain name, and so on and so forth. So ICANN works with each registry and registrar to ensure that the information is easily findable for everyone. Next slide. So now, these look a little different. And so you'll see 2 acronyms there at the top. Some blockage there. But so new GTLDs, or new generic top-level domains, and something called an IDN, or an internationalized domain name, which is going to be critically important to what the panel is going to discuss after I step aside here. So in 2012, there were new domain names, top-level domain names, introduced into the root zone of the internet. And those obviously differ from some of what you may hear called legacy top-level domains, which are the ones that were on a couple slides ago, .com, .org, and there are several others. So the goal of the new GTLD program is to foster competition, innovation, and choice in the domain name industry. It was an internet community-driven initiative that enabled the largest expansion of the domain name space. The new GTLD program was managed by ICANN, and it took shape through the policy-making process that is, as Derek mentioned in his keynote, multi-stakeholder in nature. And so now there are over 1,200 new top-level domains. So if you look at the example here, I'll take the GTLDs first, right? So there's .xyz. I apologize, there's an extra dot there. It's not supposed to be there. That's kind of a generic. There are what we call branded generics. So an example here is .bmw. It's not an endorsement of BMW, although I hear they're wonderful vehicles. And then there are kind of location-based generics, if you will. An example here being .nyc. It's not an endorsement of New York City. However, my parents were born and raised in Brooklyn, so if there's an issue, please come see me at lunch. Now, more germane to what Susan and Sarmad are going to be talking about are the internationalized domain names. And so here, I pulled a few examples. So these are actually country code top-level domain names, but they're in local scripts. So this here is on the left is Cyrillic for Mongolia. And then in the middle, we have Arabic for Pakistan. And then finally, a Chinese script for Singapore. If you could advance me to the next and final slide I have. Other way. Yeah. One more, please. Wonderful, thank you. So, enter universal acceptance, which is going to be the subject of the panel. So, the DNS has evolved, but the checks used by a lot of the software application used to validate domain names and email addresses remain outdated. So, universal acceptance is considered a technical compliance best practice, and it solves the issue by ensuring that all valid domain names and email addresses, regardless of script, language, or character length, can be used equally by all internet-enabled applications, devices, and systems. So, we have internationalized domain names out there, and now we need to make sure they work seamlessly. So in a way, universal acceptance, or more specifically the adoption of universal acceptance, really brings the promises and benefits of IDNs to fruition. And that is what your experts are going to talk about now. And with that, I will hand it over to Kathleen.
Test. Just making sure this works. Well, hi everyone. My name is Kathleen Scoggin, and I'm the program coordinator for the Tech Law and Security program here at AU, and also work with the ITP, Inclusive Tech Policy program. So happy to have you all here. I've had the pleasure of being part of the NASIC Planning Committee for the last couple months, so thank you to everyone who made this event possible, and thank you to Joe for giving us that great introduction about domain names generally, and now we're going to dive a little bit more into universal acceptance. But first, I would love both of my panelists to introduce themselves, tell us who you are, what your role is, a little bit about your background, and how you got here.
Good morning. My name is Susan Chalmers, and I work in the Office of International Affairs at the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, which is part of the United States Department of Commerce. I've been with NTIA for about 7 years, I guess. I started my career in internet governance in New Zealand, actually, with the administrator of the .nz country code top-level domain, and moved to NTIA about 7 years ago. So it's a pleasure to be here. Universal acceptance is really a very interesting but a critically important topic if we want to have an inclusive and multilingual internet. And so just thank you for having me.
So my name is Sarmad Hussain. I'm with ICANN. I'm involved with the Internationalized Domain Names and Universal Acceptance Program at ICANN. Before ICANN, I've been in academia. I was a professor of computer science back home. I come from Pakistan, and have always been interested in language technology, and that's sort of my area of specialization, and that's also, I guess, what I do at ICANN. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're very grateful to have both of you here and excited to jump into an interesting discussion. So my first question for both of you is, what is your definition of universal acceptance, and how does it relate to domain names and email addresses?
Okay.
Well, I will leave it to Sarmad to address this in any more technical way. But basically, we understand universal acceptance to serve as the foundation for a multilingual internet. It is, I think, consists of some technical standards, but collectively, it is that which is necessary for people to be able to engage online, to visit websites in their own native scripts, and it is a very important topic that we need to be discussing and coordinating, and I think coordination is one of the key factors here in promoting UA.
Thanks, Susan. So I'll build up a little bit on that and get into some technical details. As Joe was sharing earlier, that we've since 2012 there have been many more GTLDs which have been introduced in the root of the internet. These top-level domains have certain features which these strings didn't used to have before. So all the technology which was developed around supporting domain names and email addresses, which also include domain names, was built around certain assumptions. One assumption was, for example, that top-level domain would be 2 or 3 characters long. And then some people had even more significant hard coding of that assumption. They said only these 22 or 23 strings were allowed as top-level domains. And a lot of that technology is since those top-level domains like .au or .com or .org, they've been around for many, many years. Those assumptions actually got built into software. And that's caused a problem because since 2012 now there are many more strings, and these strings can be categorized in 3 buckets, I guess. You can have new strings like Sky, which are still 3 characters long, but they're not part of that 22 or 23 quote-unquote legacy top-level domains. There are also these longer strings, which are not 2 letters or 3 letters, but much longer, like dot photography or dot technology or dot international. And then there's these strings, top-level domains, which are in local languages, like the examples you saw shared by Joe earlier, in different languages and scripts. And the technology was, or is still in some cases, just not ready. And when you enter a domain name or email address, they're expecting some of the older kinds of domain names. And when you type in these new kinds of domain names, the technology, the website says that this domain name or email address is no longer is not valid, because the rules they're using to apply, they're applying to check for those domain names are still old, and that causes what is, we would want universal acceptance of domain names and email addresses, and this is what is really causing the problem of universal acceptance, which we obviously want to address. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the technical background. I know that we have a good number of non-technical people in the room, so it's great to get some background on that. And you touched on this already a little bit, but what are some of the historical and cultural factors that contributed to the lack of UA in the initial development, and how have these factors overall impacted the development of the internet?
Okay, so when computing was starting out, right, we had real challenges about memory and processing power of computers, and in that era, I guess, so to speak, normally when they started processing information, letters, for example, they used about 7-bit or 8-bit codes. This is just because the number of, as I said, the memory or the processing power was very limited when we started out. And just to translate that into what that means, if you have a 7-bit code, you can create about 128 possibilities out of that. And 128 possibilities when people were using these to create, for example, letters which people could use beyond just numbers for computers. It could only encode 128 characters, which meant, and then obviously this was being started out and done in the US. So the first thing was to, of course, encode letters and characters which are being used locally. So that's where we started, right? We started encoding letters, and since we had only 128 or 128 slots, we encoded A, B, C, the letters which are used in English, symbols and numbers which were used in English as a starting point. It was certainly not, I guess, probably intended to just only do it that way. But because of limitations of technology, that's where the starting point was. Of course, computing, internet went broader beyond, of course, the borders of US, I guess, and into Europe and into other parts of the world. The community very quickly realized that this is a limitation which needs to be addressed, and that obviously started, I guess, the next stage. But since your question was on more of historical context, since the work started from here initially, and there was limitations in computing and there was limitations in processing, storage and processing both. That was sort of the, I guess, best starting point in that context.
So just to build a wee bit on Sarmad's excellent history there, I think, as you mentioned, well, the internet was born in the United States, and so it makes sense that the DNS primarily catered to English. But I think it's fair to say that progress towards internationalized domain names was relatively slow going for the rest of the world. We saw at the International Telecommunications Union in 2002 a resolution introduced to deal with multilingual domain names, and that was really, I think, reflecting frustration among countries whose native or official languages were essentially absent from the internet. And until late 2009, the internet's DNS was available only in Latin character languages, but it's important to note that progress has been made. Today, there are 91 generic TLDs and non-ASCII scripts, and there are 61 IDNs, IDN country code top-level domains, which Joe had showed earlier, representing global communities online in native scripts. So I think the more important question here is what steps can we take now, today, because of the evolution of computing and because we have the technical solutions. And where do we go from here?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point to address the progress that has been made. And I think that a lot of what Joe had brought up and what both of you brought up as well was ensuring meaningful access to the internet. Not simply that you're able to access a website, but that you're able to use it in a way that is most comfortable to you. So would you all be able to expand a little bit on what it means to have meaningful use of the internet and how universal acceptance kind of plays into that? You already touched on that, but...
Sure. So I think meaningful expanded connectivity via a secure global digital ecosystem, which is built upon a multilingual internet, will drive economic prosperity, raise standards of living, create jobs. And so the foundation there is a multilingual internet. It's pretty straightforward. And the multilingual internet is built upon universal acceptance. When you're able to engage with the internet in your own script, in your own language, and there's so many opportunities that are yet unrealized now for folks to connect more meaningfully with government services, to promote the development of local content online. So those are just a few examples, I think.
So I'll start with an example.
Sure.
I have a colleague back home who went for graduate school not very far from here to, I guess, a university in DC. And he's now back home. He's in academia, teaches computer science. Every day he, opens up his laptop and goes online to read the news. And, even though he's fluent in English, he opens an Urdu newspaper and online and reads news in Urdu, even though he can understand everything in English. It's a cultural thing. Yeah. It's I think when we're talking about internet, there's a great quote that internet connects people. It doesn't connect machines. And when people are connecting with each other, one of the main thing, or I guess mechanism to connect is to use language. Normally they're most comfortable in their own mother tongue. I guess that's the example I was giving. So when you are actually using internet as a vehicle or as a tool to connect people, for meaningful access, I guess, what you really need to do is ensure that this, I guess, tool does support the method of communication people prefer, and which is their own local languages and in their own local scripts. And not only that, I guess, even those who are speaking English, meaningful access goes, I think one of the reasons or one of the ways the internet expanded in 2012 with the top level domains was that people wanted to use top level domains to identify communities, for example. Or identify, so we saw example of .nyc, .london, .berlin. There were many geo-TLDs. There were also many community TLDs. There are also some professional, spaces or I guess other spaces like .technology or .photography, which defines people's interest and people want to associate with that. So top-level domains provide people, choice. They also provide people access broader in their own languages. And meaningful access means that people should have that ability to use those top-level domains to associate with the right top-level domain, I guess, and be able to navigate the internet in a language they're comfortable in.
Yeah, I wanted to touch a little bit more on what you said about education and awareness. And I know that a lot of people who speak English as a first language and are doing a lot of innovation in the US might not think of universal acceptance when they're thinking a lot of these issues. So I want to ask about the role that ICANN plays in education and awareness around UA.
So basically, there are, I would say, there are three levels of interaction or three layers which we would want to address. When we're talking about universal acceptance, the starting point is awareness. But I think it doesn't end there. The next step is understanding the technical details on how this actually could be achieved. And then this last step in the process is actually not just understanding the technical details, but actually adopting those technical details to ensure that universal acceptance is actually integrated into the systems, all the relevant systems around people. So when we are working at ICANN, we are trying to work at all these three layers. There are places where we want to go, and I'll give an example of recently we celebrated Universal Acceptance Day on 28 March, where we actually try to reach out to communities across the globe. In this particular case, we supported and collaborated with communities in more than 40 countries and held more than 50 events. And the aim was to raise awareness of what universal acceptance is. We're following up with many of our partners, collaborators, and taking it to the next level. So next level is to engage with them and start doing technical training. A great example of that is as part of a Coalition for Digital Africa initiative, which ICANN's involved in. There is a project which we've started with the Association of African Universities, where we are working with AAU to make sure that the systems, websites, email servers for services for these more than 400 partner universities of AAU across Africa are universal acceptance ready. So we're doing a series of trainings with them, and then we eventually the idea is to take it to the last level where people are not only just aware and not just capable, but are actually actively ensuring that the technology they're producing and using is UA ready, so that the local communities can actually benefit from that technology more than they can actually at this time.
Yeah, making sure that those technologies are something that can actually be used.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Susan, with the different constraints of the government, different structure, what is NTIA's role in promoting UA? How do you see that? And how does it work together with other organizations to do so?
Sure. Well, I think NTIA, it would be fair to say that we promote universal acceptance because NTIA broadly we support digital inclusion. There's an incredible amount of work being done by NTIA, not in my office, but to promote connectivity through very, very impressive broadband connectivity programs. But I think it's that policy piece where we're supporting a multilingual internet, not only at home, but I would say more broadly, that we've worked in the past with ICANN, we've collaborated with other people, other organizations who are interested in universal acceptance. We've promoted this at the IGF through a number of different workshops. The focus of which has really been to kind of crack the code and answer the question, why isn't universal acceptance being taken up as a priority issue by governments around the world? What are the barriers that are standing in the way of that? And through all of the discussions that we've had over the years, something that we found is really just a lack of coordination. There's so many different players that could be involved in promoting universal acceptance, but they're not really speaking to each other. So I think one of the key challenges for any person in the government who is focused on this policy is how do you raise what is assumed to be a purely technical issue? How do you translate that and elevate it into and communicate the importance of it to meaningful connectivity, to providing government services to your citizens in their native language? That is, I think, one of the key challenges. And just as an experiment, so NTIA, we have our own different listservs, and was just trying to consider what would be the most effective and efficient means to bringing this to any CTO's attention. And after some time, we discovered that submitting a bug report it would be the most direct way to get your colleagues to look into universal acceptance, because it can be very hard to explain this to CTOs or within government departments who don't necessarily have a lot of time. But I think it's really the coordination piece, and I'd like to we can talk more about that piece. But I think at least now that, because of the excellent work that ICANN and Sarmad have done, the Universal Acceptance Steering Group at ICANN, and we've just heard about all of the activity that is going on with the Coalition for Digital Africa. I think the future is bright when it comes to this issue. We just have so much more unexplored ground to cover.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point as well, that even if you have all of the parts ready to make something fall within UI protocols, that each part is not always communicating. And so even that can be an additional barrier, an additional thing you have to overcome. So my next question is for both of you. How do you ensure that universal acceptance is implemented in a way that respects cultural and linguistic diversity, and what role do local communities play in this process? I think that that's an important question in the theme of digital inclusion and accessibility of this conference.
So I actually haven't been on the ground where UA has been rolled out in a non-ASCII language country. Think of a more elegant way to say that. But I would imagine that first and foremost, you'd be looking at the scripts themselves, making sure that you understand how the scripts are used, and being sensitive to that. I don't know if, but to be honest, I don't know if cultural sensitivities. I'm trying hard to find kind of an issue set there because I'm not familiar with one, but perhaps Sarmad and people who have experience on the ground can speak.
Let me pass it to you, Sarah.
Sure. So I think just making things universally, make universal acceptance already addresses, I guess, cultural needs. But I think going one step beyond is, there may be some script-specific details, which, as Susan was also pointing out, which need to be sort of taken care of. And that's something which obviously ICANN has been very cognizant about. So one of the things which ICANN has done since 2012, this is, I guess, right after IDNA 2008 came out, which IDNA 2008, by the way, is the underlying protocol or standard. It stands for Internationalized Domain Names and Applications Standards, which is based on a set of RFCs developed by Internet Engineering Task Force. That lays the technical basis of how internationalized domain names are implemented. What IDNA in 2008 does is it algorithmically suggests some baseline mechanism where any particular script which is encoded in the Unicode standard can be actually used within the domain name system.
Will you just explain Unicode really quickly for
Okay.
people that don't know in this room?
All right. So
very
taking
briefly.
one step back, when we were talking earlier about these encoding schemes for computers, where computers obviously use numbers, but in computers you can use numbers to represent certain letters. And as we started out, the first encoding scheme was one of the first ones was ASCII, which is American Standard Code for Information Interchange, which mapped the 128 code point spaces onto letters A, B, C, and so on. We just talked about that. But to encode all the different languages of the world, you need much bigger space. And one of the things which in early 90s, all the large technology companies like Microsoft and others did was they came together to form what is called the Unicode Consortium. I guess Unicode Consortium basically wanted to make a very large code page, which had letters not only of English but all the languages of the world. So instead of 128 limit of 128 characters, Unicode has actually a limit of more than 1 million characters. Currently, they've filled in about 150,000. So there's still plenty of space left. But those 150,000 characters currently support 161 scripts around the world, Latin only being one of the 161. And then there's Arabic and Cyrillic, and I can not possibly.
We could go on for the rest of this day.
Yes, but there are 161 scripts, including Egyptian hieroglyphics, for example, which is now extinct but still used by researchers, for example. So in any case, when internationalized domain names were being developed, they they couldn't base that onto ASCII, which is obviously limit. They had to base it on some level of a code which could support all the languages, and natural choice, of course, was Unicode. So IDNA 2008, the protocol actually is based on Unicode, and it sets a baseline. But ICANN and the standard itself says that it is a baseline, and registries and those who are using this IDNA 2008 standard need to do more to address user confusion, to address some of these things. Just to explain what could potentially cause user confusion. There are letters, even in English, which can sometimes be confusing. So, for example, sometimes capital I and L could be confusing, or letter digit 1. Similarly, when you extend those characters to 150,000 from about 128, the degree of confusion can increase potentially. IDNA 2008 already puts in some levels of safeguard by not allowing everything, for example, not allowing punctuation marks and symbols, for example, in domain names. But it stops there. So what ICANN realized was that it's only communities which can actually determine what's the right way of using their script in domain names. We at ICANN, or we can't tell. So what we did was we actually worked with communities. We've over last 10 years or so, we've developed expert panels for all the different communities. Just to give you an example, the Arabic Arabic script panel had 35 members from 22 different countries. And so on. So we actually develop supported panels where those script communities actually sat down. They included linguists, community members, DNS experts, and they actually devised the standard and mechanism to identify how their script should be used in the domain names. And so I think that's in one way we're trying to address the cultural sensitivity moving forward through IDNs, that we are making sure that these are used safely from the perspective of the community which is actually using the script.
Amazing. I just wanted to touch on a couple more questions before we open it up to Q&A from the audience. So one of the things that's often said about UA is that you need to balance it with innovation and new systems. So how do you balance the need for innovation and progress with the need to maintain compatibility with existing systems?
Okay, I'll go. So I think UA, excuse me, UA is trying to, in some ways, address something which is already innovative. Basically, making internet multilingual is, it's a great innovation. It unfortunately doesn't work seamlessly because technology needs to, I guess, upgrade itself to become compatible with this new sort of requirements. But interestingly, from an interoperability angle, there's already some of this innovation built into the internationalized domain name standard itself. Because, going back, as I was sharing, that humans would like to see things in their native script and language, which is Unicode. Internet was built on an infrastructure which was relying on 7 or 8-bit encoding, which is largely based on ASCII. Unicode normally is, I guess, so when we wanted to transition from like a ASCII-based internet into a multilingual kind of internet, there was obviously a choice that we just switched to Unicode, but that meant that we would have to undo all the infrastructure within of internet which was already there. And that obviously wouldn't really fly because that would be just too difficult. There was just so much out there. So the way people at Internet Engineering Task Force innovated was that they said that, okay, what we'll do is we'll keep the back end as ASCII, and we'll take the front end applications or application layer, which people are looking at. Machines don't care whether something's in Unicode or in ASCII, right? They'll just process whatever data they get. But humans would need to see things in their own language. So what they said was that, okay, we develop a standard which has a face for humans, where humans will see things in Arabic or Chinese or Cyrillic or whatever script they want to see in. The complete interface will be in local languages. When they type something, what the browser sends back doesn't need to be in that local language. It can actually convert that into what is called an ASCII compatible encoding. So it sort of maps it into what is normally referred to as an A label. And that gets sent on the wire and get processed internally. So it's very innovative that suddenly everybody's seeing what they need to see, but using the same backend infrastructure, which then doesn't need to be upgraded anymore. So
Yeah, I think making sure that people can type in their languages and end up in the same place, and that you don't have, conflicting two sites in two different languages that send you two different places, is a really interesting portion of this. I wanted to ask you, Susan, in terms of government implementation, how do we ensure that UA is implemented in a way that's transparent and accountable, and what role does that play in achieving UA?
Well, first, I'm not sure. So I'm not sure if the immediate focus, at least for NTIA, is seeing UA implemented in the states because we're not the primary stakeholders there, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think when it comes to the work that will be done by governments when they're implementing UA, they're already following a trend and a standard that is just part of the multi-stakeholder development of policy, which is that, if you go to the UASG website, everything is available. All of the documentation is available. I don't see many challenges to transparency or accountability. Because I think that the approach that's already been taken, that's just part of the process of standards and open standards development. I think that it is very important that it's an important thing to note that the development of standards that support universal acceptance, it seems to me that work has already been done. It's been done at the IETF. It's being looked at ICANN. All of the impressive panels. I hadn't any idea about the panels, Sarmad, that you were speaking about earlier. Such robust participation. I think as long as we follow those kind of principles in these venues, then that's the important thing. That's the best starting place.
Thank you for that. I wanted to ask one more question before we bring in the audience. So what do you both view the future of universal acceptance to be? What are challenges, opportunities, and how can people in this room, online, otherwise, get involved?
So actually, if we look at the DNS itself, I think that tells us the motivation of universal acceptance, right? Because internet started as a numbering system. You started with computers which had numbers. But early on, people felt need that numbering system is not natural for us. So they added this naming layer on top of the numbering layer, which then needs to get resolved. So even in English, or when it started, people realized that we really need to have some mnemonic system, not the numbering system, which will make this work better. I guess universal acceptance is just taking it one step further, right? We are saying that, sure, the naming system is great, but the naming system needs to go one step further and be in languages of people which are actually using the internet. And now everybody's using the internet, so it really needs to be, the naming system now needs to be in the language of the people, right? I think eventually it is what we, sure. So we have many different stakeholders from a UE adoption perspective. We work with Universal Acceptance Steering Group, which is a community community steering group, community-driven steering group, focusing on universal acceptance, and they've identified government as a stakeholder, to technology and tool developers as stakeholders, academia as stakeholders. So they've obviously identified multiple set of stakeholders, and we obviously are working with all the different stakeholders to address universal acceptance. But I guess a message for us here is eventually it boils down to us. Is the website I'm making universal acceptance ready? Is the email server or my email server universal acceptance ready? If I can make my technology, because that's under my control, it's not in anybody else's control. And earlier people used to say that, sure, I can make my technology UA ready, but I don't have the tools. But now, over time, the work by UASG, we have clear documentation that now you can actually develop technology, host email servers, which are UA ready. So there's technology out there. We actually have documentation. So I think starting point would be that we familiarize ourselves with what the requirements are, and then talk to our tech teams and make sure that our technology is UA ready. I think that would be a starting point, whereas, of course, USG, ICANN, other organizations will continue to reach out to big tech organizations and other, I guess, stakeholders to raise that awareness. But we should really start from ourselves.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So I think the opportunities of the global internet, if it were truly multilingual, are bound only by the limits of our imagination. And so just to build upon what Sarmad was saying, I think at the institutional level, there is an opportunity for some unprecedented coordination that can happen between ICANN, the UASG, the ITU development sector, and perhaps UNESCO. I mean, we've just entered the decade of indigenous languages at the UN. In 2019, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution proclaiming the period of 2022 to 2032, the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. How can we build upon these types of initiatives and foster collaboration and coordination across these institutions that are crucial to internet governance and to the promotion of a multilingual internet? And I think that's what we'll be focusing on.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I want to open up to the audience, both in person and online, if anyone has questions. We'll go over here first. Yeah, you. Oh, we can get you a mic too, as well.
I probably don't need it.
Okay, up to you.
How's that? Is that good? All right. Thank you, panel. This is very good. I have a question for both of you. First, I'm kind of a techie myself. I've been doing technology for a long, long time. How responsive have the major tech companies like Microsoft and Red Hat IBM and Google search engine technology been to the requirement or the need to do this? And if they've not been as responsive as you'd like or hope they would have been, what can be done? Is there any kind of carrot and stick, or to use the American idiom, is there any kind of thing we can do to say, hey, Google, you really need to get in here, and if you do so, it's going to be worth a lot of money to you. I know that let me put it this way, in my experience, it takes money to change things. To actually cause change is more about how much money someone thinks they can make or is available to cause the change. Where are we? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Okay, if I start. We're seeing good progress, both in the proprietary side of software technology and also on the open source side of technology. We haven't reached where we can say that we are UA ready or mostly UA ready. Just to give you a few examples, Google's Gmail, for example, you can now send and receive emails in any script and language. So they've been what we call level 1 UA ready, where they can send and receive emails, but you cannot create an email address, for example, in your local script. So you cannot create a Chinese email address, but if I send an email to a Gmail address in Chinese with using a Chinese email address, it will go and will be delivered, and you can you will be able to, using your Gmail address, respond back to the Chinese email address as well. So they're level 1 ready, they're not level 2 ready. Microsoft also recently, so Gmail's been AI level 1 ready for many years now. And Microsoft is also, their email products are supporting AI, again, at least level 1. And then recently Apple also actually announced that they're also supporting. So some of these large tech companies are already leading the way, supporting UA, partially at least, as I said, not level 2. Eventually, I guess they'll come to level 2 as well. There's some obviously technical challenges going to level 2 because email addresses are now also used as identifiers, as usernames, which is used beyond email in many other technologies. So they actually have to be a bit careful about how they allow for example, Arabic or Chinese identifiers versus. So those are things which obviously I'm sure they are working on. On the open source side, we see that more and more of email tools, for example, are now supporting SMTP UTF-8, which is the flag which is used for internationalized email addresses. So there is good support which is coming in open source technology as well. Courier, Postfix, some of those tools actually do support EI already. So we are increasingly seeing support. Eventually, it comes down to business, right? If there is a user requirement, if your client or customers require a feature, they would prioritize that feature and support it. And I think that then boils down to all of us as well, that once we start using our email addresses, domain names in local languages more and more, and people see more and more traffic of these internationalized domain names and internationalized email addresses, technology businesses will automatically, I guess, move forward and adopt these and provide support for these more and more for their own interest as well. So let me stop here. Yeah.
Very straight and short and sweet answer. Government procurement policies. And that's, I think that is, when it comes to these questions, when we're talking about standards, I think that applies not only to universal acceptance, but to IPv6, DNSSEC, government procurement policies, I think, should be the most effective means to at least generate promotion of these standards.
Awesome. Anyone else? Do you have a question over here? Yeah.
I think it's not on.
Hello. Yeah, I'm Siva Subramanian. There is a certain policy dimension of IDNs and universal acceptance that may require some more attention. One is that, for example, IDNs are good for Egypt, for Egyptian users, and it will bring more of Egyptian users to the internet, those users who do not speak English or write English. But at the same time, an Egyptian IDN would also lead to an Egyptian web space of users who speak Egyptian language, who are connected to one another, and who are connected, but we are not connected to them because their URL is in Egyptian, which we don't speak or we don't write, and the content is going to be in Egyptian, and so. One slight possibility is that while the objective is universal acceptance and universal connectivity, there is an element that could have a contra effect, that of not actually connecting users to the internet, but disconnecting users to the internet, disconnecting users from one another, disconnecting one community from another. Is enough being done to promote human level acceptance. A lot is being done for the technical acceptance of technical universal acceptance, but on the human layer, is enough done to promote trust of one script among users of another script?
So I'll try to answer that in a couple of ways. First, at a more higher level, I think internet or this online space is sort of a virtual world. It's sort of a reflection of our physical world in a way, right? We want to project, for example, this concept of avatars, right? It's sort of a projection of us into a virtual space. So at the end of the day, we want the virtual space to be as realistically close to our physical space, right? When we talk about things on the ground, right, you would not expect people in Egypt, for example, to start speaking in English to each other, right? You would want them to continue to speak in Arabic. That's the reality of things. So the way we normally exist in the world, we are communities. When we are talking within a community, we communicate in a local language. When we are talking across communities, like we are doing here, we speak in a language which is perhaps commonly understood. You can, for example, go to some place which is more francophone and English would not be the right language. You would probably want to speak in French. You go to Latin America and you may want to speak in, for example, Spanish or some other languages. So there's no one universal language, right? Eventually you would want to, depending on the community you are articulating with, you would need to represent or articulate in their local language. And I think that should really be left to the people to decide. It's not for us to regulate that what people should communicate in. So as technical folks, we need to make sure that we provide people opportunity to represent them in themselves in any ways they would like, and let them choose what is the best for them, rather than us trying to stipulate anything. I sort of go back to, and then when we've got tons, significant technology. You've got Google Translate, you've got many other technologies which are allowing you to, for example, on the fly, access content across barriers, language barriers. So I think some of that is already getting addressed. But the idea would be to enable technology to make that seamless rather than to try to limit people. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we'll just take a couple more questions. We're at the end there. You're
I'm in the line and he's in the line as well. Maybe.
That's right.
You want to be the first?
So go ahead. No, you're next.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Juliana. I'm a digital rights activist in Brazil, and I would like to understand a bit more about the multilingual strategy and what the goal, the main goal of it, challenges. And specifically, in the case of Brazil, we have a huge indigenous community, and I was in RightsCon last week when we were there discussing about accessibility and infrastructure. I mean, we need the education basis of some vulnerable communities to implement the real digital rights, because I mean, if I give my cell phone to some indigenous people, maybe they don't know how to use it. So I guess, and I believe in the digital education and of course the infrastructure that they need do in the region, for example, in Brazil that I'm talking about. But of course the language would be important to have the access, the real access. Because I mean, I can speak now in English, but of course I understand more in Portuguese or maybe in Spanish because it's near to my own language. So I'd like to understand better the strategy by itself. Thank you very much.
Well, I would invite you to to look into what has been discussed at the Internet Governance Forum, and we have, NTIA has submitted a workshop proposal for this year's IGF in Kyoto in 2023. But I really think that the work there will give you kind of a bird's eye view of the folks who are involved in this promotion. There's no kind of centralized strategy, right? I think I think maybe part of that is the issue that we need greater coordination at the institutional level around this. But yeah, I can dig around for some links even to send them to you. But if you spend time with those workshops, it will give you kind of a better impression of what's going on. In 2021, we did organize a high-level workshop at the IGF and did invite an indigenous speaker from Brazil who presented her kind of her concerns about universal acceptance and language and preservation of her language too. So it'd probably be very relevant for you.
Just to add one more resource to that list, you may also want to look at some of the work UNESCO's done. There was this multilingual in cyberspace. They had some initial work which came out in early 2000s, and they've done a lot of work since then as well. So that's another place you should actually go and take a look as well. Thank you.
So we got one more question with the microphone there, but then we're gonna take questions in the hall.
Yeah, I've been waiting for.
Okay. Did you not put the microphone there? Where is it? Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so my question is from the perspective of a small business owner and startup founder. With these new domains that end in otherwise than like .org or .com, like my company's name is Technologist Computers, and so our website is www.technologist.computer. We've had a lot of issues with compatibility, just like trying to sign up for accounts with large companies, whether it's American Express or Chase Bank or, so I wanted to know like what guardrails and what resources are available to ensure compatibility of these newer domains that are coming on board, and what resources can organizations use to make sure that their systems are compatible, with these newer domains.
Right. So I think this again leads to what we were discussing earlier, that universal acceptance is not just a multilingual issue. It is also an English issue, so to speak, or ASCII issue, to be technically correct. And it's not just about having these domain names in local languages, but also these domain names like .photography or .technology, which just don't work because there's just old technology which is currently being used or reused to develop websites. So for example, if you go and sign on, the example you were saying, that you go to a website of a particular organization and sign on it, and they say that, even though you have a valid email address or domain name, they say that this doesn't look right. So that's exactly the universal acceptance problem which we're talking about. What could you do in that particular case? Of course, there are quite a lot of technical companies out there, and we obviously need to get this message to eventually everyone. We are obviously working with the community to get to as many of them as possible, but if you get stuck with any particular one, first of all, you should do is make sure that you file a bug report with them or raise a complaint with them so that they know that this is a problem with their technology and they fix it. You could also reach out to us. So, email us at basically, info@usg.tech, or get in touch with us at UA program at ICANN.org. And we can also try to, help reach out to those organizations. But we, I guess, all need to keep at it because there are quite a few organizations out there. We are working with the community to raise awareness with as many as possible, but of course we haven't reached out to everyone yet. Thanks.
Well, thank you to both of you. We appreciate your insights so much, and thank you for being here and sharing with us. So.